Okay, so our next question is write a static method named minimum gap that accepts an integer array as a parameter and returns the minimum gap between the adjacent values in the array. The gap between two adjacent values in an array is defined as the second value minus the first value. For example, suppose a variable called array is an array of integers that stores the following sequence. So you have 1, 3, 6, 7, 12, and look at half of the solution which is provided. That how you are finding the minimum gap is that whenever you have an array, so you're stepping ahead, that you must know the length of the array, and then you have to stop one step before, like your loop will stop right here, because as you can see how you're finding the minimum gap, you're taking the next value and doing a subtraction with the previous one, then taking the 6 minus 3, then you're doing 7 minus 6, then you're doing 12 minus 7. That's how you are testing the values, and then keeping track of a variable, which you can keep track with a variable name as minimum, that if the value is less, then assign that new value to that, and at the end you will return 1. According to this, it was 1. But if you have this array pass, which is 3, 5, 11, 4, and 8, as you can see, we have a negative number. So whatever the gap is the smallest, that's how you are returning in. And there is only one way of testing the gap. It's like taking the second value and subtracting it with the adjacent and keep on moving forward. Okay, so let's open Eclipse. Any idea how to solve it? Any idea? Anyone? How would you consider this question? Easy, difficult, or very difficult? Public, static, and what we are returning. What is the return type? What we are returning? An int. We are returning the minimum gap, which is an integer. Int. Our method name is minimum gap, like that. And what we are accepting from user is int, square brackets, and list. Starting curly braces and ending curly braces. Now we have this list. Okay, as I mentioned, that scenario which was mentioned in their solution, like how they are testing the minimum gap, is looking next value and subtracting it from the previous one. So it means we have to make sure that the size of the list is greater than 2, right? So if the size of the list is less than 1, then what? If list dot length, which is length, is less than 2, if list dot length is less than 2, then what? Return. It means there is only one value and minimum gap is 0. So, and now else is the case where your minimum gap is more than 2, it means you have to test the value. So for that, we need a minimum variable to keep track what is the value, what's the minimum gap. So whatever the first minimum gap, whatever the first difference of the two array is, that will be our default value for minimum gap. We cannot set minimum as 0, because what if our minimum gap in the list is 7 or 6, and this minimum will always be 0. So the 0 is an integer number which can be returned, so we cannot set the default value. So how we will identify our default value? By subtracting the first two numbers. As you can see, we have already tested this condition, so it means we are here. It means we have at least 2 number in our list. And how we are subtracting? List of 1 was minus list of 0, right? Semicolon, enter. This is your minimum gap. Now for loop. Now for loop, for condition. Now where your for loop will start? Come on, in the chat, where your for loop will start? With index what? Index 0. How index 0? Our task is to find the minimum gap of all the adjacent values. As you can see, you have already tested, you did list of I 1, 5 minus 2. So you have already did 5 minus 2. Now what you have to do is you have to start here, 3 minus 5, and then 4 minus 3, and 0 minus 4, like that. So you have already done 5 minus 2. So 5 minus 2 is already done. So it means your I will start, I will be equals to 2. You'll do 3 minus 5 now, comma, I will be less than what? Less than what? I will be less than what? List dot length, just less than list dot length, because if it's equal to, it will stop one step before, and I plus plus, starting curly braces, ending curly braces. Now inside, what we have to do is we have to identify another variable with a gap, because our minimum variable is keeping track of the minimum. So we cannot update it with all the new gap we receive. We will compare this variable with our previous variable. If it's less, then we will update our minimum. So int gap you are equals to, how we are subtracting, we will do list of I, which is 2. Now we have to say 2 minus this one, right? And how do we know what should I write? List minus what? How to write the previous one? Inside, what should I write? 1, because this is 3 minus 5. 3 minus 5. What will be the condition here? List of I minus what? I is this 3. 3 should be subtracting 5, and then I will plus plus, I will be 4. 4 minus 3, I will be 0. It will be list I minus 1. Correct. I minus 1, semicolon, and now you will check if the gap is less than minimum, then minimum will be equals to gap. And at the end, this is where your if is closed, this is where your for loop closed, outer if, else condition, and return here minimum. Control X over here, control V, return minimum. Any questions so far? Any questions? This is the code we have. Zero, 1, 2, and 3. Let's test this code. Let's say we have minimum gap list dot length. Is list dot length is less than 2? It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Is 4 is less than 2? No, this is false. So we will not run this if condition. We will go in else. In else, what do we have? In else, we have minimum list of 1. So your minimum variable, minimum, is equals to list 1, which is list of 1, list index 1, 6. 6 minus list of 0, which is 5. 6 minus 5 is 1. So your minimum is holding, minimum is equals to 1. And then you're starting your for loop, I equals to 2. You're starting at index 2. I is less than this dot length, I plus plus. So int gap, what your gap variable is holding? Gap says equals to list of I is 2. What we have at index 2? We have 9. So 9 minus list of I minus 1. I minus 1. I is 2. 2 minus 1. 1. List of 1. What we have at index 1? 6. 9 minus 6. What is 9 minus 6? It's 3. So your gap is 3 equals to value. Then you check if gap is less than minimum is 3 is less than minimum. Minimum is 1. Is 3 is less than 1? No, 3 is not less than 1. I plus plus I is now 3. Is 3 is less than list dot length? Your list dot length is 1, 2, 3, 4. Is 3 is less than 4? Yes, 3 is less than 4. You go inside, you have again gap value updated, list of I. Your I is now again, now where is my razor? Your gap is now changed. What is your gap now? Your gap, list of I is 3, 3 is 8, 8 minus I minus 1, I minus 1 is 3 minus 1 is 2, which is 9. So 8 minus 9, what do we get as 8 minus 9 is negative 1. Now you check if gap is less than minimum. Your gap is what? Your gap is negative 1 is less than minimum, which is 1. Is negative 1 is less than 1? Yes, true. Minimum you are updated to gap. So your gap is negative 1. So your minimum is also equals to negative 1. I plus plus I is now 4. Is 4 is less than 4? No, 4 is not less than 4. Stop the loop and return minimum. Your minimum is negative 1. Is negative 1 is the minimum gap? Yes, and that's the correct answer.